especially with regard to the priesthood starting in chapter 21. So anyway, chapter 18, laws on sexual morality. And so what I want to do first is look at the beginning and the end, how this very specific material is bracketed. So Leviticus 18:1, the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, I am the Lord your God. So this is a constant emphasis, particularly, and I put this in your outline, in chapter 19. This connection with all of these commandments and the statement, then, I am the Lord. After the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do. And after the doings of the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, ye shall not do, neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. Ye shall do my judgments, and keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which, if a man do, he shall live in them. I am the Lord. That little phrase there in verse 5, which if a man shall do, he shall live in them, that is very similar to, I think it's Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4. The just shall live by faith. Same principle. If you want to live, you walk by faith, you walk by God's word. If a man do, he shall live in them. So God gives you a pattern for life, you might say. Now, like I said, this is very specific in regard to sexual morality. Verse 24. Let's read the ending bracket, if you will. Defile not ye therefore yourselves in any of these doings, for in all these things the nations are defiled. You'll notice that term is repeated, defiled. Verse 25, and the land is defiled. Therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomiteth out her inhabitants. That is a pretty strong statement. I don't know who in here enjoys vomiting, but I'm not on that list. We all have to do it occasionally. It is not a pretty picture. There's no way to make it look good. There's no way to make it feel good, appealing. So this is very strong, very graphic, if you will, language. The land itself vomiteth out her inhabitants. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these, here's another word for you, abominations. Neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger. Remember, I've told you, pay attention to this word stranger, because if a non-Jew converted, if you will, to Judaism, they had to follow the law, who sojourns among you. For all these abominations have the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled. That the land spew not you out also when you defile it, as it spewed out the nations which were before you. For whomsoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the souls that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore shall ye keep mine ordinance, not commit any of these abominations. What is that, the third or fourth time abominations has been used? Which were committed before you, and that ye defile not yourselves therein. I am the Lord your God. All right, so there's your bracket. So we have stern warnings against adopting the sexual ethic of either Egypt or Canaan. All of the sexual perversions listed, your first blank here, are called abominations. Literally, things that are disgusting. There's your first blank, disgusting. The land had been polluted by this behavior. We read this phrase throughout this text, but then also in other passages, the idea of uncovering the nakedness of someone. This is a euphemism. So I want somebody to Google euphemism and read the definition for us. It's always helpful to know what our words mean. Euphemism. Your second blank. You might want to speak it so you don't have to try to spell it. If you don't know how to spell it, I don't know. It's a tricky one.
A mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt in referring to something unpleasant or embarrassing.
Okay, would you agree that there is language that is inappropriate for, in my opinion, I would say fairly conservative on this, and you probably are too. Are there words that are not appropriate for us to use? And I think not just Christians, but I think particularly Christians, because our speech is to be seasoned with salt. that it may administer grace to the hearer. I think that's Colossians 4 and verse 6. There are words we know, don't we? You just don't say these words. We call them sometimes four-letter words, curse words, swear words, things like this. They're off the table. But then there are other words we can replace that aren't so bad, right? We can tolerate them a little more readily, you might say. I was thinking of some examples. Where was I when I gave this example? I think maybe it was in our Sunday morning young adults class. Can any of you tell me a euphemism? Illustrate what we're talking about. So, do you still have that definition up? Read it again for us.
A mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt when referring to something unpleasant or embarrassing.
Okay, a softer word. You make it sound a little bit. We know what you mean. Just go ahead and say it, right? I mean, so, what is a euphemism you could think of? Passed away. Okay, that sounds better than they died, I guess.
Let go.
Let go. Okay, they let go. Talk.
We let them go.
Yeah, we let them go. All right. All right, that'll serve my purpose. So, anyway.
We got in trouble by the grandkids. We said, "Oh my gosh," and they said, "Oh no, we don't say that. We say goodness."
Oh my gosh. Okay.
We don't say that. We say, "Oh my goodness."
Okay. Well, good for your grandkids. And sometimes, if you've raised your kids, let's say conservatively in terms of their language, they'll call you on it, won't they? Yeah. I'll tell you one that really bothers me and has, and Gail brings this up occasionally, is something is really bad and you don't like it. What do we say? Well, that really... What? Who wants to say it? There's nothing wrong with it. Say it. I'm not saying it. Okay, so you get what I'm saying. It's a softer term for something that's too harsh. Ma'am? That stinks? Okay. I mean, there are all kinds. And even for what we call the four-letter words, there are softer, but, we know what you mean, right? Yeah.
Other people would say,
Yeah.
"Use God's name in vain."
Yeah. Use God's name in vain. Just say it. If you mean it, that might as well. To uncover the nakedness of someone was a euphemism for sexual intercourse. That's just what it is. So euphemism, if you're wondering, it's EUPHEMISM. There you go. So there are three categories here. You've got incestuous relationships, and I list all those for you that are mentioned. Parents, stepsisters, daughters-in-law, aunts, uncles, sisters-in-law, two sisters while one is still alive. Those are all obviously forbidden. Other kinds of sexual relations forbidden during menstruation, your neighbor's wife, homosexuality, and bestiality. I mean, these are specific. Multiple ancient sources reference all these types of sexual perversions as being common, and especially in Egypt. So that's the bracket. That's why I wanted to read the first 5 verses and the last few verses first, because don't do what you saw in Egypt, and certainly don't pick up on what you're going to see in Canaan. Now, there's kind of an incidental lesson there to me. Are you influenced by the environment you find yourself in? Are you influenced by your peers? Yeah. And your peer pressure is not limited to 15-year-olds. Every one of us has peers. But for some reason, we just talk about young people and peer pressure. But we adults are subject to it too, aren't we? So this idea that we can live in, we have to live here, but that we can put ourselves, let's say it that way, in certain environments and say, oh, that won't ever affect me. Or put ourselves with certain people and their behaviors that we know are deviant, that are contrary to God's Word, and then just take the mentality of, well, that'll never affect me, is foolish. I mean, you've got passages like this. You've got a direct statement in 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Evil companions do what? Corrupt good morals. That's a true statement. That's in the context of false teachers and the resurrection, but you can lift the principle and it's still true, right? Evil companions corrupt good morals. So, you've got incestuous relations and other kind of sexual relations forbidden. But then you also have spiritual fornication mentioned specifically in chapter 18 and verse 21. Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire unto Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of the Lord, the name of thy God. I am the Lord. So I give you two examples in the text: 2 Kings 16, and that's King Ahaz, and 2 Chronicles 33, and that's King Manasseh. Manasseh was the longest reigning king in the history of Judah, 55 years. And he was perhaps one of the most deviant of all the kings, Israel or Judah. He repented, though, at the end of his life. But regardless, those are a couple examples. So, we're looking at the law of Moses. We have very specific restrictions. But do you think, considering our culture and its sexual ethic, that there are some lessons we can take from this? I watch some and listen to some podcasts that deal with modern issues, particularly husband and wife relationships in terms of like young people and their habits on social media. Have any of you ever heard of OnlyFans? Okay? If you haven't, let's keep it that way. The promiscuity that's promoted online. It's my body. I can do with it as I please. Nobody can judge me. Oh, and by the way, I can still be a Christian and do whatever I want with my body, with anybody else. Online, camming, all of this stuff. That is so prevalent, and it's in your face 24 hours a day if you want it to be. It's right here, isn't it? So, there are lessons that we can take from this. So I put in your outline here. The LGBTQIA plus movement. All right, so all of those letters. It used to be just LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. T, transgender, which the transgender movement kind of destroys all these other movements because you can be whatever you want to be, right? Man can be a woman can be a man, men can give birth. All right? Q, depending on who you talk to, Q either means queer or questioning. I, intersex. In other words, your sexual preference is fluid. A is asexual. There's no real interest at all. And then plus includes a lot of stuff. Read Leviticus 18. It includes a lot of stuff. So here are two illustrations from our current culture. NAMBLA and MAPS. Have any of you ever heard of MAPS? Do any of you know what that is? A minor attracted person. Yeah. That's in the plus. See, if you change the language, if you use euphemisms, that doesn't sound so bad. I'm not a pedophile. I'm attracted to minors. Doesn't that sound better? I mean, technically, it's not as in your face, right? It's an attraction. I can't help it. NAMBLA, the National Association of Man-Boy Love. You don't think those perversions are new, do you? They're not new to our culture. And so, don't do what you saw in Egypt. Don't do what you will see happening in Canaan, because the land is vomiting these people out. So, I put this in your outline. Don't use the Old Testament. This is advice to you as a Christian. All right? So take it for what it's worth. Do not use the Old Testament to condemn behavior that is condemned in the New Testament. Somebody read Leviticus 18:22 for me.
Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination.
Do you know what that means? Yeah. Do not lay with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. It's disgusting. What that term means in the Hebrew. It's disgusting. It's against nature. I don't need Leviticus 18:22 to talk about that, though. Because what's going to happen when we get to chapter 19, you're going to see why I'm saying what I'm saying right now. Okay, so let's do this. Let's jump over to, who wants to read for me? All right. Tristan, get Romans 1:26 and 27. Who's out? Who else? Forrest, 1 Corinthians 6:9. And just read them when you get there.
Romans 1:26 and 27.
Yes, sir.
For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections,
Vile affections. What's he say?
for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet.
That says exactly what Leviticus 18:22 says, doesn't it? But I'm not under the jurisdiction of Leviticus chapter 18 because and again, the reason I'm saying that, I'll just go ahead and give it away. You turn to Leviticus 19 and it says, the Israelites, you can't use hybrid seed. You can't wear clothing that's a mixture of like what we wear, 50-50. That's forbidden for them. You can't shave the edges of your beards. You can't have a rounded haircut. So people will say, well, yeah, that's what Leviticus 19 says. Okay, fine. Don't use the Old Testament for things the New Testament addresses, and addresses in very explicit language. We know they left the natural use. The woman left the natural use of the man left the natural use of the woman. God let them go that way. All right, 1 Corinthians 6:9.
Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites.
Okay, so Forrest, what version are you reading from?
That's the New King.
Bible doesn't say anything about homosexuality. Man made that. It wasn't until 1946 and the New Revised Standard Version came out, that's the first time homosexuality was ever used in the Bible. That's not what that word means. That's an argument that the other side uses. Homosexuality is never mentioned in the Bible. They say Leviticus 18:22 is about like maps, not about consenting, loving relationships. So you know what? In a sense, that's true. Homosexuality, that word was never used. Listen to me, was never used in the Bible. Can you tell me why? They weren't writing in English. It wasn't written in English. And so they're not going to use that word. And plus, words originate in time, don't they? Languages evolve and new words evolve all the time. It's like the word dinosaur. I was listening to a podcast today as I was at the gym. The word dinosaurs aren't mentioned in the Bible. Well, no, they weren't. But the word dinosaur wasn't coined until 1841. What do you expect? So anyway, here's so those two terms that, hold on, I'm all over the place here. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9, the term, if I'm not mistaken, who has an old King James? All right, go ahead and read it from there.
Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind.
Okay, effeminate. The Greek term is malakos, and it literally means a soft man, a man who presents as feminine. And that is Is that not an issue in our culture? You've heard of toxic masculinity? Males are just toxic? Well, some are, sure. But you're going to brand every male as toxic? It's a man who presents as feminine. The second word there, abusers of themselves with mankind, the New King James says sodomites. The Greek term is arsenokois, and it's a combination of the words bed and male. This is a man who beds a male. So the argument of, well, that word didn't appear until 1946, okay. You obviously don't understand how language works. I'm sorry? Well, okay, what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, Ezekiel chapter 16 says that they were condemned because they were unkind to strangers. All right? That's the Ezekiel chapter 16, I think it's verse 48. Let me show you something, though. Because, see, that's what people do. They cherry pick verses. I know what Ezekiel 16 says about Sodom and Gomorrah. But they'll say it had nothing to do with homosexuality because, well, this one verse says that. Let's go to the book of Jude real quick. You can't, and that's the thing, cherry picking and choosing what verse you want to use to make it apply to whatever situation you want. That's not, you don't do that with any other type of document or book you read or anything. Jude 7. Somebody read that, please.
As Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in similar manner to these have given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set before us as examples, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire.
Fornication and strange flesh. Sure, they were not hospitable. Sure, they were wicked. But Jude specifies, as well as the account in Genesis chapters 18 and 19, it was fornication and strange flesh, things that are against nature, Romans chapter 1. So, the point being, don't use the Old Testament to condemn behavior that is also clearly condemned in the New Testament. And again, that's not to just kick the Old Testament to the curb, but I already told you what they'll do. Well, if you do that, Leviticus 19 says you can't wear a blend of materials in your clothing. You can't shave your beard. So, anyway, any questions or comments on all of that? Yeah. Okay, Jeff, since you said that, I'll just open this up for everybody. Jesus never condemned homosexuality. You know that? Find me a verse where he said anything about homosexuality. This is another argument. So, how would you respond to that? From the beginning of creation, Mark 10:6, God made them male and female. There are other things that Jesus didn't talk about. And read 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul says, what I'm saying to you now, it's not me, it's the Lord. A couple verses later, he says, what I'm saying to you now, it's me, not the Lord. In other words, Jesus didn't address this. He starts talking about virgins. Jesus didn't address this, but I am. So, you have, Jesus may not have directly addressed specifically, thou shalt not do this, but he clearly set out the pattern from the beginning of creation, didn't he? And then you have his apostles who have the same authority because he gave them the Holy Spirit to guide them into all truth. We've been talking about this a lot in our young adults class in terms of the church. The church is established upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, right? What we've been talking about. The church follows apostolic teaching, but Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone. He's the foundation of the foundation. Everything is squared up off of him. So, I have plenty of things in the New Testament that talk about the unnatural desires and works of the flesh, Galatians 5, that are forbidden and that have always been forbidden by God, as Jeff was saying. So and this is your last blank here, the promised land is personified as a person who becomes defiled and begins to vomit. That's God's view of this. Well, that's not very nice. You're being awful judgy. We love people. As long as it's consensual, as long as it's adults. Here's the thing. Those who are activists for that side are not satisfied with that because, again, just a few years ago, it was LGB. And then you add another letter, and then another letter, and then two more letters, two-spirit, 2S, and then we just add a plus. The flag changes all the time. And essentially these groups, and there are even groups, you can go on, it's interesting to watch this, you can go on YouTube and find videos of the L's and the G's saying, we don't want the rest of this. The rest of this stuff is crazy. It's like they just devour one another over time. So, anyway, Leviticus 18 addresses a lot of things that our culture... See, and here's another thing that kind of drives me up the wall. Christians should never talk about, or people should never talk about politics and religion. And you know what we have now? We have a bunch of mentally infantile people who don't know how to talk about either politics or religion. Everything in our life is politicized. The prices of your grocery is politicized. The prices of your gas, contraception, abortion, literally everything is politicized. And the Christian is told to sit back and shut up because you are offensive. I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second. And we can go from Genesis to Revelation to find faithful people of God who were not only willing to speak in terms of both, obviously, religion, but politics as well, but were in fact involved in politics. So, I don't buy it. But we're just the bad guys for doing it. And sometimes we're the bad guys among ourselves because what you said wasn't very nice. You guys know what tone policing is? I agree with what you said, but man, I just don't like how you said it. Could you say it nicer? Anyway. Joe, that's a rant. Anything else? Thank you. Any questions or comments on all that stuff?
Well, when Jesus talking about Jesus not condemning that, could you not use in 1 Corinthians when he says it's better to burn? I guess stay single. I know he was talking about fornicating, but could you not?
1 Corinthians 7, it's better to marry than to burn. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. And that's specifically because of that, stay away from... So the end of 1 Corinthians 6 ends, 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, flee fornication. Chapter 7 then begins on a different subject, but he pulls from that same subject, but he says, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife and every woman have her own husband. Because it's better to marry than to burn. Some people say, well, that means to burn with passion. Some people think it means burn in terms of judgment. Whatever it means. Well, what it says is, if they can't control themselves, marry. Yeah. Yeah, that's like the first 7 verses of 1 Corinthians 7. Yeah. Okay, the woman at the well. Yeah. Go and sin. Well, what about the woman taken into adultery? Same, not the exact same scenario, but woman, where are those who have condemned you? She said, nobody's condemned me. And she's talking about to death. He says, well, go on, sin no more. Yeah. Plenty of New Testament passages that address this problem. And not just all the absolute perversions, fornication, but even just fornication. If you're not married, you don't have sex. Period. That relationship is preserved for one place, and that's marriage. Hebrews 13:4, among other passages. So, anyway. Chapter 19, various laws for Israel. We've got 5 minutes. The point of these laws is stated in verse 2. So somebody read Leviticus 19:2, please. There you go. That's what this chapter is about. And I put the list of verses for you where that principle, or just the statement, I am the Lord your God, something along those lines. 15 times in this chapter, there's this repeated emphasis. You be holy, for I am holy. And then repeatedly, I am the Lord. I am the Lord your God. Things like this. So there are horizontal laws, okay, man to man, and vertical laws, man to God. Most are straightforward. They don't need any comment. And I group those together. Verses 3 through 18. Honor your parents, all right? We know that. Keep the Sabbath. We're not going to go through all this. No graven images, etc. 3 through 18, very straightforward. 20 to 22, very straightforward. It's about fornication. Stay away from it. Here's what you do if people commit it. And then verse 26, what does it say? Don't eat anything with the blood. We addressed that last week because the life of the flesh is in the blood. You have to process your meat properly. And then verses 29 to 36, just various things. Don't prostitute your daughter. Keep the Sabbath. Reverence my sanctuary. Give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Verse 31, which I want to talk about that for a minute. So here's the ones that are a bit maybe different for us. Let's do this quickly. Somebody read verse 19. Leviticus 19:19. Okay, so no mixing, no beefalo, no ligers, nothing like that, no hybrid seeds, all of that kind of stuff. The question is why? Well, I don't know. Other than, I put in your outline here, it has been suggested that these types of restrictions enforced the idea of Israel's separation from other nations. You don't mix with other nations. And we'll deal with that in later chapters. Make no covenant with them. Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11 deals with this as well. It could also be, one person said this, it could also be emphasizing God's original design of form and distinction in creation. It's kind of like, the Old Testament says a man shall not wear what pertains to a woman. Don't be cross-dressing. God made man, God made woman. Act like it, right? Somebody read verses 23 through 25 here. Okay, so this is what they plant when they get there. 3 years, you can't eat it. It's unclean to you. The 4th year, it's all a gift to God. Starting in year 5, you can eat it. Why might that be the case? Well, perhaps indulging too quickly on crops would cause a food shortage. You go after everything that comes out, and then you're out of food pretty quickly. Perhaps to teach the people to be grateful and appreciate the produce as a gift from God. That's kind of verse 24. It's all a gift to God in verse 24. Maybe it's implanting in Israel's mind that we're not our own source of sustenance. And we need to, it's kind of like the first fruits. You give the best to God. Somebody read verse 26. Enchantment and soothsaying would be comparable today to horoscopes, astrology, and tarot cards. I've got a quote here for you from spiritanddestiny.com. It's kind of interesting. In pagan cultures such as Rome, these were used as methods of learning the will of the gods. And other passages in your Old Testament give this same restriction as well. The New Testament uses this word sorcery. Galatians 5:20 and Revelation 21:8. It's a work of the flesh, and then it's one thing that will cause you to be cast into the lake of fire. But the Greek word there is pharmakeia. Do you hear any English word there? Pharmakeia, pharmaceuticals, hallucinogens, things that alter your mind. Okay? So this is what spiritandDestiny.com said. Divination. I wanted to know what they said it is. I have an idea, but what do those who practice it say? Divination is an ancient practice of energetic communication, serving as a bridge between our world and the spiritual realm. Now, I will acknowledge there is our world, this cosmos, and there is a spiritual realm. Ephesians uses the phrase 6 times, the heavenlies, or the heavenly places, as the King James says. It's one of the best rituals to tap into our intuition and connect with our guides. You will notice, and I studied martial arts for many years, and you kind of had to spit out the bones with this stuff, but there's this constant emphasis on our higher consciousness, our higher self, becoming more conscious. They have levels of consciousness. You can even look up charts. Throughout history, cultures worldwide have sought knowledge, guidance, and messages from higher consciousness using various divination tools, from the I Ching in China to the runes of Norse tribes and to the cowrie shells of African and Caribbean traditions. These are replacements for God's will, essentially. And they are forbidden both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. You don't mess with this stuff. And personally, I don't think it's because it's real. If you've ever taken time to read horoscopes, they are so generic. Very generic. And I know a lot of people do it for perhaps entertainment purposes, but Scripture says these things essentially are substitutes for God's spiritual guidance. Somebody read verses 27 and 28.
You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shalt thou mark corners of a beard. You shall not make any cutting in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord.
Again, why? Well, it is said that certain hairstyles in Arabic countries were used to honor their local gods. I didn't put the references in here. They're there. The restrictions on cutting and marking have to do with bodily disfigurement for the dead, and it's mentioned again in Deuteronomy chapter 14. It seems to be more along the lines of what happened there with Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Remember, when their gods wouldn't answer them, what did they start doing? They started cutting and lancing themselves until the blood was gushing out, appealing to the gods. Again, it's kind of in line with divination and those enchantments. But see, that's what people will do. Well, you quoted Leviticus 18:22, but Leviticus 19:28 says Christians can't have tattoos. Is that what Leviticus 19:28 says? Were there any Christians on the earth in the days of Moses? No. And that's not what that passage is talking about anyway. So, respect the context. Know your Old Testament. Know your New Testament. Because many of these practices are, in fact, condemned in the New Testament. But many of them are not. Know the distinct. This is what it means to discern between good and evil. To be able to rightly divide the Word. All right. Any questions or comments on? That's a lot of information, I know. But to me, these two chapters really go together. Anything before we are invaded? Okay. You were thinking of John 8? Well, he just told her, you have no husband. Yeah. That's okay. I'm glad I've never misspoken on anything. All right, guys. Appreciate it.